you grateful.
Welcome everybody. I will declare this briefing session for the City of Vincent on the 11th of May 2021 open at 6 p.m. On behalf of the City of Vincent, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, the Wadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and pay respects to elders past, present and emerging. I will declare this briefing session for the City of Vincent on the 11th of May 2021 open. Okay. Mayor Emma Cole is an apology for this evening. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Susan Gontaszewski. I'm the Deputy Mayor and I will be your presiding officer this evening. We'll now move to public question time and the receiving of public statements. We keep it moving. We've got a number of people here. It's great to see you here in the chamber. We do live stream our public question time. If you would prefer not to appear on the live stream, please let me know and we can accommodate that. Otherwise, when you come up to the lectern, we ask that you state your name, the suburb in which you reside, and the item number on the agenda to which you are speaking today. This is a briefing session, and so we do restrict our public question time and receiving of public statements to the items that will be on the agenda for the meeting next week. Everybody gets up to 3 minutes. The CEO does keep time, so if you hear an alarm while you're speaking, we do ask that you wrap up your comments fairly promptly. There's no fixed order. It is first come, first served. And then you can, if you just come up, we will move through the agenda in the order in which items are raised from the floor. So if I could have the first speaker, please.
My name is John Visca. I live at 148 Chelmsford Road, North Perth, and I would like to talk on 8.3, the public consultation on the kiosk in Hyde Park. Thank you. Hyde Park, in the consultation process, I noticed there was no mention of the heritage historical aspect of the park. I have done a lot of research being a garden historian and also the chairman of the West Australian branch of the Australian Garden History Society. And in 1897, that land was gifted to the people of Perth from the Forest Government, and it was a Crown grant. And my research has shown on your current title, there is still, number one, a Crown grant with conditions. The conditions which I have researched was that that land was for recreation purposes solely. The proposal now is to have a commercial venture, a permanent commercial venture in land that was set aside as a pure recreational space in that way. And in 1998, the park was entered into the State Register for Heritage Places, and in 2003, a major conservation plan, a management plan for Hyde Park was commissioned by then the town of Vincent. This is a management plan. Even though it was done in 2003, it sets out many ways of how that space should be managed. And it also states that when City of Perth, it was in their jurisdiction, they had rejected commercial applications citing that the Crown grant conditions does not allow commercial activity enterprises in the park in that way. And I think it's very, very important. Now, the trees, the shrubs, all of that is on your significant tree register as such, and that was done many, many years ago. So it's an important point. The area, the park was given in the conservation plan a zoning of considerable significance, and in a Heritage Act, that is the second highest rating. And that brings with it implications. If you're working in a heritage space, you have to then respect what conditions. You accepted it, you ratified that many years ago as a council, and therefore you have to respect the fabric of the park, and the fabric of the park are the trees. In the area where you are proposing to have a kiosk, there are 120-year-old trees, there's Moreton Bay figs, there's camphor laurels, there's plane trees. I went down there today, and to manage that space, You could not get anything like a rubbish collection truck in there because rubbish is going to be generated. Any damage through the roots in compaction impedes air and water penetration of the soil. Any broken branches by large equipment, they also have an effect. Is my time up yet? Okay. I just suggest that I think you really should not go ahead with this proposal because of the heritage implications. I understand whatever happens next week, that has to go to the Heritage Council for their approval. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. Next speaker, please.
To the post again. Good evening, everyone. My name's Yoko Stoch. I'm the Director of Road Access and Planning at Main Roads WA. I live in the city of Belmont. I'd like to speak to item 6.1 in relation to mini roundabouts, if that's okay. I've already done my intro. For those of you that don't know, I got tasked some time ago with objective of implementing a 4-year fully funded program for a low-cost urban road safety program. There were 2 councils selected for a trial or a pilot, I should say, of that program. One of those in the city of Stirling and the other being the city of Vincent. City of Vincent proposal, if you're not aware of it, is for 9 mini roundabouts. They are not traditional roundabouts, they are mini roundabouts. There's been certainly a number of conversations between council and other agencies with myself and some of my staff members, including RAC, IPWEA, the Institute of Public Works and Engineers Australia, WELGA, West Australian Local Government Association, etc., as well as obviously my Minister's Office in terms of this project going forward. Some of the concerns raised are around simulation with safe active streets, which again, very important program being delivered by the Department of Transport. What makes mini roundabouts safe, generally speaking, because there is some concern with vulnerable road users such as pedestrians and cyclists. And also, I'd like to just mention a little bit about crash reduction factors and more recent research than what was previously provided in relation to an Austroads document of March this year. In relation to safe active streets, I'm mindful of time, so I'll talk rather quickly. We did consult with Department of Transport in relation to the Safe Active Street program. They are aware and importantly have accepted that whilst the Urban Road Safety Program is separate to theirs, it does not prohibit the implementation of a safe active street. Mini roundabouts being a safe option, we need to understand that people can and will make mistakes. The intersections, the 4 ways that we're currently looking at, if someone does make a mistake, the opposing vehicle direction or the one with current priority is likely to impact at between 45 and 55 kilometres an hour. What a mini roundabout does is it forces driver behaviour change, and that is for everyone to slow down on all approaches. When you achieve that, you might not hit the magic target of 30 kilometres an hour as per Austroads documentation, etc., in terms of impact with a vulnerable road user. But you'll certainly get a hell of a lot closer to it than 45 to 55 kilometres an hour. And it will allow for braking, which may let you achieve that magic number of 30 kilometres an hour. So whilst, yes, it's predominantly at vehicle collision and crash reduction, there are wider benefits for vulnerable road users. The latest crash reduction factor in terms of the document from Austroads, it was published 23rd of March 2021. The City of Monash, in conjunction with Austroads, tested 43, there's a tongue twister, 43 4-way cross intersections on local road networks. And that's the key. This is local network. We're not talking about higher order roads, local roads here. They found of the 43 sites that they tested, a 78.9% reduction in serious crashes. That's what we're talking about here. Typical programs which council and public may be aware of, such as Black Spot, they're very reactive. You have to wait for crashes to occur. You cannot spend money on a what if. When crashes occur, it gets a benefit cost ratio applied to it and funding gets granted. The low cost urban road safety program is completely different. For starters, it's 100% funded by Main Roads. Council's obligation is to undertake design and community consult only. Furthermore, it is proactive. It is addressing crashes based on risk. That's what I just spoke about. That speed reduction on a 4-way is the risk that I'm talking about. Thank you very much for your time and the opportunity to speak more about the low cost program. I'm certainly very passionate about it, and it's something I want to see on the ground, certainly within the city of Vincent and wider councils over the next 4 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Yoko. Next speaker, please.
Good evening, I'm Rodney O'Brien. Until recently, I was at 522 William Street, Highgate since 2003. I'm now at 40 Mount Street in West Perth. I also wish to speak to 8.3. I think we're dealing with an issue of overthink and unnecessary expenditure in choosing to put a cafe into a garden shed. I think there's a simple way out. Turn those food trucks onto the curb either in Glendale Street or Throstle Street. Turn them away from rolling onto root systems in the park. She's a grand old lady since 1897. All it would require is for families and also visitors, tourists to walk the grass to the curb and make their selections. There's a very fine example of this at the eastern extremity of the park. There's a cafe on the corner of Lincoln and Williams Street. Mums and prams and bubs turn up regularly and order up and then cross busy William Street to find a spot under the jacarandas. It's a very popular and regular thing. I also have with me 2 documents, one handwritten and one typed. It's a bit of history with this. It's something like 1935. Mr. Evans writes to William Bold, the very famous town clerk of the city of Perth, and he asks permission to erect a marquee, red and white marquee at the Lake Street and in summer, so that he might serve soft drinks, ice creams, cakes, etc. Mr. Bold replies that after the council had met, that they considered his application and they had to reject it with regret. This set of correspondence, I think, follows another document which I've done a lot of research on Hyde Park between 2011 and 2019. And I've come across a document which is from the state to the city of Perth, the administration of the day, pointing out that there are some things that can and some things can't actually be traded or yes. So it seems to me there is something in the history of this park that really does relate very much to that. I also noticed that in the preambles, in considering this idea, there was a suggestion that by putting the cafe into the shed, that it might actually help contribute to the relevance of the park. Honestly,
excuse me, Rodney, you have reached your 3 minutes, so if you wouldn't mind wrapping up.
I'll go in 1 or 2 words.
Thanks.
I think that the relevance of the park was brilliantly demonstrated in 2003, in 2020 with the COVID scare. There were hordes of people in the park with bring your own under the shade of the trees and at the barbecues. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any further speakers this evening?
Good evening, councillors. My name is Islam Booyah. I live on 12 Wade Street, and I also am the owner-operator of What the Flip Food Truck in Hyde Park. Closed down, unfortunately, for the past months due to my mental health. I had to take care of my life a little bit. Working 89 hours a week in that park, running that food truck is quite challenging, I can tell you. And I can tell you quite a lot about how to operate a place and a kiosk within that park with respect of the people that are going there. I would like to agree first with the gentleman here tonight regarding the heritage of the park. Initially, I'm against the kiosk, not because I'm an operator, but more because I've seen every single kiosk opening in Perth and closing down a few years later due to the lack of operation. Or if they didn't close, they turned out to be very, how to say, sugary place. Commercial operators need to sell very cheap ice cream to $5 in order to make some money, because unfortunately, this industry is very, very hard to keep margin when you're not selling alcohol or don't have a huge volume. I was reading this proposal and I was the questions felt really biased towards the kiosk. It didn't feel like it was a honest opinion we could give here within those questions or through that questionnaire that I've been reading. But my point here will be, first, I would like to explain the council that this is going to be a seasonal job. There is no customer there between 2 o'clock to 6 p.m. I see a lot of people wanting to have the kiosk to be operating on that time on those questionnaire, but I just would like to realize that it will be really hard to find a crazy person like me that opens for $100 a day for 14 hours. That really doesn't happen very often. Lucky enough, I was in a condition in my life where I wanted to create a place of life and a place where people could gather around my food truck. It was more of a project than a commercial venture. And today, as you see, I've closed for 4 months. I mean, it's not for the money, it's really for more of a mental health and also to create something that was good. Unfortunately, that place in the park have become very hostile to me due to the other operators there who spread rumors and keep attacking me anyway. But that's another story. That's something I'm dealing separately. I think the money that is needed within the park should be, instead of putting it into a kiosk, we should use it to create more culture and more improvement within the park, better benches, better lighting, better water spots, better running of the toilets, and also showing a little bit more of the whole heritage that parking is holding. We only have a few signs that are all dying around. I would see that little kiosk, why not as a mini museum that is, talking about the history of the park, the heritage that this park brought, and all the things that this gentleman has been saying. Those are important things that the culture needs to be improved a little bit more rather than the commercial side of things within the park and within the community. And I was hoping that COVID showed us a little bit more of that, but unfortunately COVID has just come back to normal. On this, I will finish right away. I don't think that this kiosk will ever fulfill the wish and fantasy that we right now all are hoping to have within this park, especially without a commercial kitchen and having to bring food all the time in. So once again, it's a commercial place, and I think we need to see more culture, more cultural thing, and more things that are improving the park and not just a commercial aspect within a public space. Thank you.
Thank you, Zee.
Hi, my name is Laurie Saunders. I live in North Perth. I'm addressing item 5.3, which is the accessible city strategy. Reading through the documents that have been sent through and having conversations with different staff at different times, there are some issues that I have, so I'm trying to raise them as questions rather than as statements. It's unclear how the goals and ideas shared in the draft strategy will actually change people's behaviour, as the transport network is so heavily influenced by through traffic. A lot of the traffic issues in some of these local streets, whether we're talking about the mini roundabouts, whether you're talking about other things through main roads running up, down Fitzgerald and others, a lot of that traffic is through traffic. One of the key issues for local residents is the rat running, that people are moving from city to suburbs well past North Perth or the other direction. And part of the issue I see is that we have some traffic bottlenecks through peak hours and other times, and the rat running. I'm not sure whether the roundabout solution is going to be, I accept it's a trial and I get that, that's great. But I don't see how that's actually going to actually solve initial problems that exist right now. There are two mentions within that strategy of priority areas. When reading through the points made, they are completely ignored, yet they are listed within documents as priority focus, high priority in one case, yet there's no change to any documentation or no suggestion that they'll be reviewed. I don't see that the volume of cars is being reduced through any strategy outlined in the accessible strategy. And therefore, as a result of no change of volume, and clearly the speeds are an issue. There are some key streets which are used to make cut-throughs between Walcott, Walcott, but mainly Fitzgerald, William and Walcott in that bracket there. And there aren't any strategies to reduce the traffic that says, this street here is too busy, I'm going down this one. We have situations in these local streets where cars are parked on one, sometimes two sides of the road, and we have vehicles coming from either direction. On certain occasions in some of these streets, the traffic is enormous, parked on the side of the road, and we watch cars in our local streets overtake each other or stop behind cars and then make a beeline to get across 60 to 80 metres to get to the other line of the parked cars before the next car wants to come through. I fear for the day that some little kid decides to chase the ball on the street, they'll cut out across between two cars out onto the road and they'll be cleaned up. That's the thing that really troubles me. And I don't see anything in this document that suggests we really want to address that. I'm also concerned that I made contact with local staff from the City of Vincent in March last year with a meeting at our residence, outside our residence. I've heard nothing since, yet I've since received information about mini roundabouts trials. I've received draft city accessible city documents. I've attended a briefing meeting. I've forwarded another email looking for a response, which included councillors and staff. I've received nothing back, and that's over a month. I'm just questioning whether this issue about rat running through our local streets is genuinely cared for, or are we looking for a solution so we can use a couple of them to help people cut through and get around at the expense of public safety? Thank you.
Thank you, Laurie.
Yes, Simon Chester, Chelmsford Road, Mount Lawley. So I wanted to speak on item 8.3. So I'd just like to preface what I'm about to say with that I enjoy my coffee. I would really question the process that you councillors are presented with here in this paper. I would say that the process is wrong. I would contend that you guys should be making a decision on information that you're provided, and you're not provided with the full information. If you look at, so you're going to in principle adopt or approve the kiosk in Hyde Park, and then the administration is saying, then you'll think about the commercial leases, the terms of leases, the rent and rent reviews, then you'll develop a business case. Then you'll look at the estimated cost of installing a warm kitchen. So you go and investigate the costs. You go and investigate queuing and managing the kiosk to avoid significant plantings and trees. And as we've heard from John Visca, it's surrounded by camphor laurels and Port Jackson figs. You're talking not only about trees that were planted 120 years ago, there's also remnant Indigenous plantings in that kiosk. If I go down to that park, and I rode through it this evening, I see hundreds of people. If I go down there of the weekend, I see thousands of people in that park. And so what you're proposing is to intensify the use in that park. There has to be a place in the world that you can like enjoy serenity and the majesty of a park and the significance of the park. It's one area that I'm prepared to forgo having a cafe latte or whatever I need to have. So what I would say is, if you guys are actually going to sign up for that this kiosk is approved, and we've had very good arguments as to why it should not proceed, please at least make the decision with a fully informed, because at the moment you've put out a questionnaire, whereas much of the questions were about a healthy food is what it was about what the impact to the park was. And so I suppose one of the things that really gets up my goat is that when you're putting it out there, you're saying that the operator is going to be purely a commercial operator. So what's he going to, he's just worried about the buck. I mean, you guys are managing town centres, and you would see that it's like parking, it's access, and it's just it's a drive. So what we'll see is it'll be death by 1,000 cuts. It'll be hard surfaced areas, and then it'll be covered areas, and then it'll be parking. So I would really encourage you guys to make a fully informed decision and like think about what the long-term future and what your vision of that park is and whether a kiosk fits with that vision. So please consider that.
Thank you, Simon. Any further speakers this evening?
Good evening. My name's Graham Pitt. I reside in Tennyson Street, Leederville. I'd like to, and apologies if I've got this wrong, I haven't done this before, item 5.3, and I'd like to talk to the parking proposal. We have fairly serious issues with the limited parking or verge side parking in our street, and I'm concerned about a statement where on page 96, it says increased residential density allows for the reduction of private parking, including zero parking minimums. Our street runs off Loftus Street, and what we're seeing is the medium density accommodation currently and recently been built in Loftus Street are forcing people to park, or residents to park up the side streets, which ours is one. And I think there's this plan. I sent a proposal through probably about 6 months ago about suggestions, and none of those have been enacted on. And I just think maybe it's at a higher level, but the actual parking issues haven't yet been resolved. And I'd just like them to be considered.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Graham. Appreciate that. Anything further from the gallery? Yes, please come forward.
My name's Barbara Liedl. I live in Mount Lawley. I'm just speaking in 6.1 in the public consultation regarding the roundabout pilot project. I just want to have on notice that I am actually completely in agreement with it. This morning, I nearly saw a cyclist cleaned up by a car that didn't stop on the corner of Raglan and Norfolk Street. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. Okay. If there's no further speakers, please come forward. We'll make sure everyone gets the chance.
That's it. Steve Heinl is my name. I live in Forest Street in North Perth, and I'd like to talk on item 5.3, the accessibility city strategy. I've only got a very simple question. In one of the items towards the end of the strategy, I think it's page 37, council makes a contribution to the this Perth parking management area of $400,000 a year. And when you do an overlay of our council boundaries to the Perth parking management area, it's probably only 5% that we actually overlap that boundary. And when you read what they're looking to do, it's for the congestion, or managing the congestion and traffic of inner city streets, providing cat services, bike paths, all that sort of stuff. For $400,000, I could spend that an awful lot better than giving it to the City of Perth. So maybe you can all consider what we really should do about that and how we can get it back to the City of Vincent to use for our own purposes, which are going to be far better than the City of Perth. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Next speaker, please.
Good evening. I'm Pat. And my name is Sam, the owner of the shoe rights officer at Hyde Park. We've been in Hyde Park last 5 years. We were wondering.
Sam, can I just get the suburb that you?
Yeah, we Ellenbrook.
Yeah.
Ellenbrook, yes.
Okay, and you're speaking to item 8.3, I take it.
Yes,
Yeah, thanks.
Sorry. So basically, we are against of the building the kiosk in Hyde Park. I was wondering, even if you want to go ahead with it, maybe we can have meeting with the council, maybe speaking to the current vendors, or maybe comes with the idea, or what can be improved. If also the comments people would, I would say maybe not all of them are genuine, but if it's problem is the noise or different thing, maybe we can work something out. Maybe we can supply the power. I mean, when we started here initially for over 5 years ago, myself and another coffee van, we had no problem 3 years until the certain vendors turned up, and then things gone different way because obviously they weren't following the rules. Maybe if you would have a stronger policy or rules, this thing wouldn't happen, because there was no problem that first 3 years when we were working, and then all of a sudden happens. And basically I would say whatever council would decide, we're happy with, but maybe we can have one meeting with the council. We'll be there 5 years. We know every single people comes here because we see the same faces in there. And
some other issues that we've had is like with when customers line up, maybe we can place the vans away from the pathway, so there's more room for people to stand around. All the packaging that I use, that's another complaint. All my stuff is biodegradable and compostable, and it's also been approved by council. The hours of trade, maybe we can sort out different hours of trade. Obviously during school holidays, we need more, be there every day, but like the days when it's quiet, maybe we can not go there on those days. And obviously wintertime, less people turn up to the park. And yeah, I think that's about it. And obviously if the kiosk does go ahead, we're quite happy with whatever the council decides. Just, yeah, hopefully you can be.
Obviously it's a lot to say, but for the 3 minutes we can't say. So that would be good if we can have a meeting.
Yes, that's fine. I think we've got your contact details, so we'll have someone reach out to try and schedule something prior to the meeting. Thank you, Pat and Sam. Next speaker, please.
Hi, I'm Chris Niven and I own a business in North Perth on Fitzgerald Street. After reviewing 8.3, I feel the council needs to either make a decision if they want a vendor or go ahead with the food vans. Reading the report, I feel that there's a bit of work that needs to be done still. I previously looked at the Beatty Park proposal for when they were looking at getting another vendor in there, taking it away from the council. And that process to me was a little bit, I asked certain questions for rents and everything. And I think for a business to consider that position, that needs to kind of be upfront. Reviewing the site as well, I agree there's a lot of work to be done, and where the position of the proposed site is, you would have to, for being a cafe owner, there would be substantial works that need to be done there if you wanted to fulfill what everything has been shared with the community. I think the community have a good idea of what they want, but I guess where the proposed site is would be a little bit tough for the costs that you've probably submitted. That's, I reckon, a smidgen of what you're actually going to probably need if you want to fulfill all those commitments that the council want to go with queuing, seating, rubbish. I think that'd be a big issue there. But if there is an opportunity to discuss further of what is required on a business front, I'm more than happy to give my thoughts on that. But yeah, I think the process, though it's a good idea, there's still a lot of questions that need to be asked on. One, do you go with just a vendor or do you go with the kiosk? Because I think you can't have both. If I'm going to commit money from my own business into that area, you've got to have those guidelines and follow those rules through. So thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Any further speakers? No? Okay, we'll move on through the agenda.
Through the chair, we've got 2 public questions.
Thank you, Jordan. I
submitted
always
in
forget
writing.
that. Please go ahead.
Whereas, keep me to 3 minutes as well. It's quite long. Andrew Main from North Perth, speaking on item 6.1. Is the city aware of research by Austroads that highlights the importance of limiting the speed of drivers at roundabouts to 20 to 30 kilometres per hour to ensure cyclist safety? Does the city acknowledge that 3-metre roundabout analysts will not slow drivers to this speed and thus increase the risk to cyclists and pedestrians? The letter, Mr. Sean Foster of the city advised me on 9th April that it was not possible to determine the impact of the roundabout proposal on the speed of vehicles using streets in the project area. However, the report to tonight's meeting states that the proposal should lead to a reduction in traffic speeds. What modelling has been done to justify this latter statement? The letter distributed to residents and the information provided on the city's website during the consultation period stated that there were numerous crashes in the area. How many crashes have there been in the period during between 2014 and 2019? Is it the case that there were only 5 crashes in total during this period? The letter distributed to residents and information provided on the city's website during the consultation period stated that there were numerous low-grade crashes in the area. The report to tonight's meeting states that the severity of traffic accidents within the precinct will be reduced. Is this latter statement accurate? Is there a grade of accident less severe than low grade? Is the city aware of Australian literature and research reports produced by Austroads that clearly demonstrate the danger that roundabouts pose to cyclists? Is the city aware that RACWA, which represents active transport road users on the Road Safety Council, advises pedestrians to not cross our roundabouts due to the safety risk? Why have officers of the administration not provided elected members and members of the community with comprehensive information about the negative impact of roundabouts on pedestrians and bike riders? Did Main Roads or another state government agency request inclusion of the compact roundabouts concept in the City of Vincent's accessible city strategy? If not, who did? Has there been an agreement between Main Roads Department and Office of the City that this roundabout proposal will be implemented by a particular date? When was this agreement made and what form does the agreement take? Further to this, have any elected members been a party to this decision or have they been advised that this commitment has been made? Has the installation of new curbing that recently took place on Norfolk Street South have anything to do with North Perth roundabouts proposal? Who funded these works? Has any work been undertaken by staff or contractors and or money spent on this proposal on the presumption that it would go ahead? Why did the letter to residents and information on the city's website state that this proposal would be funded by the Road Safety Commission, but the report at tonight's meeting states that the proposal will be funded by Main Roads? Is the community engagement exercise recently undertaken by the city just a waste of time because the city was always going to proceed with this proposal no matter what? Was the one-sided nature of the information provided to residents and members of the public about this proposal a strategy to ensure that that objection to the proposal was minimised? That's the end of that one. Also have Kingsley Sullivan from Mount Hawthorn speaking on item 5.3. Whilst I support the majority of the content of the above document, I'm greatly concerned it has been and is being used as an excuse to do nothing practical. Each day on my daily walk within the city of Vincent, I see every footpath overgrown from residential properties and low-hanging council street trees. Where we might have a 1,200 wide footpath, this is routinely reduced to as little as 600 with overgrowing foliage. I believe a visual inspection should be made of every footpath and offending residents notified they need to cut back the overhanging foliage. Similarly, the City of Vincent needs to identify all low-hanging street tree foliage and have it trimmed. This is particularly for those with mobility and visual disabilities as identified in the ACS document. The footpath on Scurry Beach Road outside Braithwaite Park continues to be both an eyesore and a health issue from the fallen fruit from the Moreton Bay figs. For a period late last year and early this year, the footpath was routinely cleaned once a week and the problem was kept under control. Until a week ago, it had been neglected for at least 6 weeks. I and many others I observe routinely cross the road to avoid this section of footpath. This is one area that widening of the footpath is critical due to the high level of pedestrian traffic, especially strollers and prams, and the lack of an on-road cycle lane coupled with a number of mobility scooter users. I once asked our local member, John Kerry, why the state government allowed cyclists unfettered use of footpaths when there are dedicated cycle paths. He said it was a decision of the previous Barnett Liberal government. Given the majority position of the McGowan Labor government, couldn't this now be rectified? Why are we spending money on dedicated cycle lanes when there is no obligation to use them? It is my experience that cyclists riding on footpaths strongly and sometimes aggressively believe they have absolute right of way. Naturally, cyclists 12 years and younger should be exempt. There remains an attitude by many residents that they are able and entitled to park their vehicles so that they encroach onto the footpath and in many cases park right across the footpath to force pedestrians to detour onto the road to get around them. It is extremely rare to see a City of Vincent ranger in any residential streets addressing this issue unless a formal complaint is made. Whilst I do acknowledge the response of rangers to such formal complaint, it should not be the responsibility of every pedestrian to make such reports. The practice is so widespread the city's switchboard would become jammed each morning. Perhaps a well-publicised reminder to all residents would bring about a drop in such selfish behaviour, especially if there was also a warning that continued partial or full obstruction of the footpaths would incur infringement notices. The group most often infringing in this way are tradies who seem incapable of having their vehicles more than 3 metres from them. With the issue of building permits, could we not also issue reminders that the practice of parking over footpaths will not be tolerated? Rangers would be aware of these building sites and these should be monitored for infringements. Perhaps now is the time for action rather than continual planning and discussion.
Thank you, Andrew, Kingsley and Jordan. I'll now hand over to the CEO for declarations of interest.
Thank you. Through you, Deputy Mayor, I've received 2 declarations of interest. The first is from Councillor Smith, as noted in the agenda in relation to item 4.8.4, which is an impartiality interest relating to the report and minutes of the Audit Committee held on the 4th of May, noting Councillor Smith's husband is a member of the Audit Committee. The second is a proximity interest from Councillor Toppelberg in relation to item 6.1 on the mini roundabout pilot project. Councillor Toppelberg notes that his primary residence is located within the proposed trial area and is not seeking approval to participate in the debate or to remain in the chambers or vote on the matter. That's all, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, CEO. We'll now move through the items that have been raised by the public gallery. The first one being 8.3, the results of consultation, proposal for a commercial kiosk at Hyde Park. Can I have questions, please? Councillor Hallett.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Through you to the relevant officer, has the city done any modelling or forecasting of whether a kiosk will draw additional people to Hyde Park and what that means for parking use and waste management?
No. Chair, sorry.
How would the city interpret the intent of our sustainable environment strategy and public health plan in a tendering process for a commercial enterprise using public land? I understand that there's a couple of bullet points, but would appreciate if there's a more detailed info on this in the briefing notes. For example, how could a tender ensure that only healthy food was provided?
Through the chair, yes, we can provide that in the briefing notes. Essentially, it would be, these would be the criteria that we advertise, and then it would be up to the submitter to demonstrate how they would satisfy that. And then that submission would essentially form part of the lease agreement, similar to our other tenders, how they work.
If the shed was not converted to a kiosk, what other purposes could it be used for?
Through the chair, currently it's just being used as storage. Acknowledge that suggestion from the gallery about a museum use. Those other kinds of options haven't really been explored in too much detail. So yeah, I think as part of the EOI, I think we will get some very different proposals. I don't think we'll just be getting small cafes. So it would be interesting to see what we get back. And again, that decision can be made later.
Under the section on sustainability implications, it states that it does not contribute to any. I'd be curious to see comment on admin's thoughts on how we can ensure that everything we do does contribute to one of these outcomes. And then under the public health implications, it says, if the kiosk vendor provides health food and beverage, it aligns to a public health priority. The if doesn't give me a lot of confidence about that it would actually do that. So just wondering, perhaps in the briefing notes about that tendering process and how that would actually ensure it and not just make it a desirable criteria.
Through the chair, yes, we can include that.
Anything further? Councillor Castle.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Just a couple of questions that some of which were raised in the gallery. Can administration give any comment on the information that was provided about the Crown grant with conditions for recreation purposes solely? Is that something that has been looked into?
Yes, through the chair. The Crown Grant operates similar to a certificate of title, or at least it did until it was cancelled a few years ago. At the moment, the certificate of title refers back to the Crown Grant in Trust and its conditions, so it still has effect, even though that original grant has been cancelled. The conditions that were quoted is just the condition that Hyde Park be used for recreational purposes. In administration's opinion, the proposal for a commercial kiosk is in line with the recreational purpose. While it's a commercial entity, the activity that is undertaken is the same as what is currently being undertaken on the site. As we've heard, purchasing coffees, having picnics, that kind of thing. It's all the recreational activities that are currently being done. We've had advice from the Department of Lands that they would also support that position. They have previously supported it, places like South Perth foreshore, renting kayaks, that kind of thing, where it's a commercial entity, but the activity that's actually being undertaken is recreational in nature.
Thank you. Has administration given any consideration to potential damage to the trees and plant life in the area as a result of rubbish, access, compaction, parking, some of the concerns that were raised from the gallery?
Through the chair, yes. The main one that I heard from the gallery, maybe mentioned a couple of times, was about the building of the kiosk. And just want to reiterate that it is in the existing shed that's currently there. So there won't be any expansion of the footprint of the building. If we go ahead with a warm kitchen, there won't be any need for earthworks either. So it would be a very low impact proposal. In terms of compaction from, say, the food vans or from deliveries, that kind of thing, I think that's something that we can address through the submissions, ensuring that those access ways are kept away from root zones and that kind of thing.
Thank you. I think actually some of the questions related more to the ongoing operations of the business, but you've answered that question in terms of addressing those in the conditions. I also had a question about the conservation plan that was prepared in 2003. It is mentioned in the report, and there is a reference there that there is obviously a history of not operating small businesses or kiosks in the park, and a number of policies that are referred to. Am I right in reading this that administration's position is that this proposal, if it were to go ahead, is in a line with that conservation plan?
Through the chair, there is that first statement, Town of Vincent's practice of not granting licenses for vendors to operate in the park continues. The long-standing tradition that the City of Perth also did not. I think maybe we can make that a bit clearer in the report, but essentially, yes, it would be in conflict with that particular statement, but I don't believe that the remaining policies that are essentially the actions of the conservation plan are unable to be overcome through management arrangements or through design or operation.
Any further questions? Councillor Toppelberg.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. A couple of questions. So, and this one's to the CEO, I think. So the question was the way in which the officer recommendation is worded has been presented from the gallery as being odd in that it's potentially backwards in saying we'll approve and then we'll go out and see what is going to come back. So we've heard from someone who's been operating a food truck business in the park for a number of years who've got particular information that would be of value in relation to the busy times within the park. We've also heard from a local operator who operates two businesses that are effectively, one in particular is a hole in the wall cafe, and who has knowledge of smaller scale food and warm kitchen businesses, both of whom have questioned the potential viability of what's proposed. In terms of the project itself, so two questions. One is, has the city, prior to making the recommendation, sought any feedback or consultation from hospitality operators who may be able to provide specific advice on costs, etc. So I will also add the information from the gallery is that the costs are, pardon the pun, undercooked on what the potential setup would be. So has the city engaged at all with any experts in the hospitality field? And given that the feedback, and whilst it comes from the gallery and it is from businesses that have explicit local knowledge, is effectively what's proposed is not viable. How do we propose, is the city, are the office comfortable that the recommendation as presented is the best way to move forward in terms of assessing the viability of a potential kiosk within the park?
Through you, Deputy Mayor, this is not the first time that the city has proposed and gone out for expression of interest for this. There was a previous expression of interest process which it did attract some interest. Different but comparable is that we recently leased out the cafe operation at Beatty Park that sees nearly 1 million people through its doors each year. We weren't inundated with a large number of potential cafe operators. Hyde Park is, as the public gallery mentioned, a high destination site within the city. The way the recommendation's framed is that we don't want to exclude proposals we haven't thought of, but we wanted to keep it broad and open. But the large theme that came out to the public consultation is that the submitters are looking for high quality food options and healthy food options, and also any operation to be highly sustainable, particularly around waste and other sustainability considerations. So we would be assessing if we received any proposals against the offering that would provide and how it would complement Hyde Park and not change the character and nature. And I think some of the words from the public gallery related to the serenity of the site. I think one of the previous expressions of interest last time council considered this was for a much larger scale proposal, which probably would have overwhelmed the site. This is it is a very small storage shed. I think it can fit one large lawnmower or two smaller lawnmowers in it at the moment. So it would be a discrete building footprint, and we would be hoping for high quality operators to provide submissions. We wouldn't be able to predict what they would be at this stage, so we want to keep it broad and open for potentially other commercial operators within the city of Vincent who could package together a proposal for council's interest. We haven't sought expert commercial hospitality advice on that. It's currently a unrenovated garden shed. We'd be looking for an operator to want to invest into a longer term proposition to pay at their costs for the fit out and renovation of that site. So I think it could be challenging, but there'd be a lot of other considerations for us once we see the proposal, and we'd want to work with a preferred tenderer if we did receive any suitable proposals.
Thank you. Couple of other questions. There was a comment from the gallery or a question about whether this deals with food trucks, which was formed part of the consultation, whether or not it was possible or had been considered to move food trucks to be accessible, so they would stay, they would be on the street effectively, so accessible from the park, but to be, the suggestions made were Glendower and or Throstle Street. Has that ever been considered by the city, discussed with community or discussed with food truck vendors?
Through you, Deputy Mayor, we haven't considered or consulted on that during this current process, but we are in constant liaison with the community and nearby residents about the operation of the food trucks. Their licenses are usually renewed on an annual basis. Part of the consideration about the awarding of the licenses for food trucks is to try to come up with a complementary offering and a high quality offering for food and coffee, but we have to deal with the bidders that we receive. Again, we haven't been overwhelmed with a large number of bidders for those licenses and to operate within Hyde Park. The city could look at any alternative proposals for siting of those food trucks, including whether it was roadside access, as suggested by a member of the public gallery tonight.
Part 5.1 of the officer recommendation, to be read in conjunction with the intro to part 5, is that to suggest that it's possible that the recommendation following consultation, if the recommendation is approved or if it's approved as recommended, would be to potentially have a kiosk operator and to locate food trucks elsewhere within Hyde Park?
Through you, Deputy Mayor, that is a consideration. But again, until we have a proposal and a preferred proponent to have this discussion with and have this negotiation, including regarding what the commercial lease terms would be, it would probably go to that point about whether or not it would just be a solely selling coffee and not food, or a food offering which may or may not complement the food vans, which can change on a regular basis. They've been very stable for the last few years. There was previously a coffee cart which no longer operates there. So again, that was something we wouldn't want to rule in or out at this stage. We'd want to be able to present that with further advice to council once we had a preferred submitter for potential operation of the kiosk.
And
sorry, through you, Deputy Mayor, just to clarify, 5.1 in particular was about the power sources. So we've had concerns and some complaints about the noise generation from the current food vans. The food vans are restricted under the policy of just operating where they currently are by the lake, on the lake side of the footpath. There is no electricity outlets there. We've had some costings about what it would cost to run electricity from the kiosk location, which is the toilet block under the footpath, to that area. Just to make the point, that would be an additional cost. There are already electricity and power outlets elsewhere in Hyde Park, which could be a cheaper option to provide power if the food vans were relocated as part of this proposal. So that is something which we could provide council with further advice on if and when we have potential proposals to consider following this EOI process.
And just on that point, in terms of, just for clarity, that the question of food trucks appearing anywhere else within Hyde Park other than where they currently are and the policy was not didn't form any part of the consultation at all. So there's no feedback being provided. And also two other things. One, confirmation that in terms of what you just mentioned then, that the cheapest option is to not relocate and just to say no to elsewhere in the park, but also what, in the event that the recommendation is, the council votes to support the recommendation as presented, a public tender process, what are the options open to council at the end of that tender process? Just to confirm, is open to council to not accept any of the tenders at that point, if that is the will of council, and also what consultation process would take place that deals with the matters addressed in part 5.
Through you, Deputy Mayor, yes, to confirm this is an entirely discretionary decision-making process for council, whether or not at any stage to proceed or not proceed with the concept or proposal for the cafe kiosk, and that could be stopped at any time during an expression of interest process. We currently have the mobile food vendors policy, which does restrict where food vendors can currently operate in Hyde Park. There is some discretion for the CEO to provide temporary alternative options if there was a particular reason why the current vendors couldn't locate where they are. So any change or permanent change to where the food vans are currently operating would be a decision of council in the future. And because it would be a change of policy, Deputy Mayor, it would require public consultation.
Any further, Councillor Loden?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Just a query around impacting around that site. So I understand the concept is that we're going to turf out our lawnmowers and you're going to have like a hole in the wall with 1 or 2 people in there, a coffee machine and some food. Obviously, there could be other options, but that's broadly what I'm visualizing in my head. I think some of the questions from the gallery are really around the impacts of people accessing that. So there's a big queue of people outside the site waiting for their coffees, and then people taking that food and then compacting the roots and the trees around that area. And then similarly, how we access waste services to that site as well and bring things into that site too. I recognise that it's difficult to put a concrete plan because we're still seeing what happens, but has there been any thinking around how those, can those issues be mitigated through plans or something like that? Or is it just, it depends on what we get back as a submission and then we'd have to decide what we could do to mitigate it if that was the case?
I think in the first stage through the chair that we could probably provide a bit more advice on the issue around the compaction and especially around people just walking around the site generally. Obviously, there are currently thousands of people walking around and personally wasn't envisaging that it would draw that many more people. So from that perspective, there might be an intensification in that localized area. So I'll get some more advice on that for the briefing notes. And then from the waste perspective, sorry, Andrew, did you want to provide or?
Yeah, through you, Deputy Chair. My understanding is that waste truck already enters, uses the path, a good sized waste truck and collects some public bins. So I'm sure that we could service that, a kiosk without damaging tree roots in a way that we already do. So I'm sure that can be managed.
Any further questions? Councillor Patakis.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Through you, just on that point, not just the rubbish collection, but service, had been any thought given to the impact of delivery vehicles for the delivery of food and other items that are required in the kiosk?
Through the chair, I think with the delivery, it probably really does rely on what the actual proposal is. The number of people we can kind of estimate with deliveries, yeah, it really depends. So the frequency and the weight of vehicles, that kind of stuff. So as part of the submissions, we'd definitely be considering that.
So through you, Deputy Mayor, so there's been no thought given to controlling or what the preferred operations would be from the council, from the city's perspective?
To the extent that we've considered that we would want to minimise it as much as possible. But beyond that, it really, yeah, like I said, depends on what the proposal is to see whether it would be appropriate, where the access ways are, how frequently it occurs. So yeah, from that perspective, we wouldn't really be able to provide much more information until we have a proposal in front of us.
Anything further? Everyone? Okay. I just have a couple of questions. Just in relation to the tender process. So is it the intention that the proposed public tender would come back through council for council approval of the overarching criteria for the tender prior to release?
Through the chair, yes.
Cool. The Department of Lands, you've said that they have provided some advice in relation to the interpretation of the condition. And just to confirm, I'm having docs on tap issues. Was that advice provided in writing to and attached to the briefing agenda?
Through, no, it wasn't attached. It's only verbal so far, but we'll get it in writing by next week.
Thank you. I think given the issues raised from a number of members of the gallery, it would be useful to have that available. So can I confirm the recommendation doesn't make any recommendations on the future of the food trucks, primarily because the future of the food trucks would be something that would form part of a commercial negotiation with an operator. Is that correct?
Through you, Deputy Mayor, as part of this process, we're not making any recommendations regarding the future of the food vans because we don't have an alternative yet. We don't have a preferred tenderer to operate the kiosks, so we may not receive any suitable tenders. So that would leave us with the status quo regarding the food vans. And it's also the case that depending on what the proposal is and whether it complements the current offering with food vans or whether it could potentially be a conflict, then that would be something which we would want to negotiate with the preferred tenderer and provide advice to council on how we could best manage that.
Okay. I'll probably foreshadow perhaps some changes to item 5 on the agenda to provide, I guess, anyway, I'll just foreshadow that and work with you over the week.
And through you, Deputy Mayor, just to confirm, we hadn't ruled out the possibility that one of the current food vans may wish to express interest in operating out of the kiosk as well.
Thank you, CEO. Okay, if there's no further questions, we will move on to item 6.1, public consultation results, mini roundabout pilot project. Councillor Toppelberg will be leaving the chamber for this item. Any questions? Councillor Hallett.
Through the Deputy Mayor to the Manager. When Main Roads approached the city in early 2020 about the Urban Road Safety Program, what was the process that the two organisations went through to identify this as the best area in Vincent for this particular intervention?
Through the Chair, Main Roads initiated the discussion. They'd identified what they thought were progressive local governments that might be interested in hosting this pilot program. And then we had an informal meeting with officers from Main Roads, ourselves and representatives of Stirling to look at the different areas within our respective cities that were appropriate and what was considered appropriate for those particular type of projects. We identified this one because of its proximity to the 40K trial already. It gave us an opportunity to dovetail onto that and use some of what we've learned from that area as a basis for trying to transfer it to this area respectively. It was only later in the piece that the offer of the 40K extension came up from Main Roads as an inducement almost to the city to try and improve the viability of the project. Hopefully that made sense.
Thank you. In the report, it refers to directly affected residents. Can you just confirm who that is referring to?
Through the Chair, well, but obviously we went out to a wider area than specifically just those streets will have the mini roundabouts, but what we considered was the directly affected residents were the people in the streets such as Ethel, Norfolk to the north, Ragland, and to the south, Chelmsford. But then we extended the consultation, obviously as per the report, to Vincent Street, Fitzgerald Street, up to Forest Street and across to William Street.
Okay. But in terms of looking at the data and isolating out those ones, we're talking about just residents on the streets, not people regularly commuting through with whatever form of transport they're using.
Obviously, through the Chair, sorry. Obviously, the consultation was open to the broader community, and we endeavoured through the Imagine Vincent website to allow everybody to have an opportunity to comment as well, those interested parties that live outside the affected area.
Are you able to provide any data on the crashes in the designated area over the last 10 years?
Through the Chair, I think the 5 years, it was 7, but I'd have to refer to the data and include that in the notes for next week.
Thank you. On page 2 of the report, it states Secondly, and most significantly, the selected area has low traffic speeds and low traffic volumes with good sight distances, which provides significant levels of safety to pedestrians and cyclists alike. Therefore, what's the rationale for conducting the trial in this location if it's already got low traffic speeds and low traffic volumes?
Well, through the chair, currently with the urban speed limit being 50k, I suppose, figuratively speaking, the speeds are relatively low because they're in the order of the mid to high 40s. But the purpose of this would be to bring them down closer to that threshold of the accidents of 30Ks that we're aiming for, and also in conjunction with the 40K zone. So it'll be an overall package to reduce the speeds to a more appropriate level.
And does admin have an idea of what success would look like in the pilot project in terms of lower traffic volumes and lower speeds?
Through the chair, what we've found with the 40K trial is it's been a slow burn essentially. And we'd anticipate this area would also, to some extent, follow that pattern. But the intervention of the mini roundabouts, I think, would be hopefully lead to a more dramatic reduction over a shorter period of time.
Under strategic implications, it refers to accessible city and public health plan. Under accessible city, it says this project will better integrate all modes of transport and increase services through the city. Are you able to explain what that means in relation to this?
Through the chair, we're of the belief that, I know there's some reservations from some community groups that it's not to the betterment of cyclists and pedestrians, but we're of the belief that if we can bring the speeds down to the appropriate level, then it will be to the betterment of the whole road, the whole community and all the road users respectively.
There was a couple of questions from the public gallery about the Safe Active Street intervention. I'm just wondering if you can provide a bit more detail on the relationship between the two projects and the timeline and overlap.
Through the chair, well, we had discussions with the Department of Transport, and while their focus is obviously on the cyclist in that particular Safe Active Street, they've also the recognition that this could be beneficial to their project. So what we're proposing to do is, if we get the appropriate funding to do the Safe Active Street, we'll actually start the project in reverse and work our way down towards this area on the assumption that the mini roundabouts are approved. It gives us 2 years to establish the credibility of the mini roundabout project, and we can proceed with the Safe Active Street project. And we think the two will complement each other because we can already bring the speeds down to appropriate levels. We can then look at putting the single lane slow points in the mid blocks between the mini roundabouts and create the Safe Active Street and actually achieve the 30, which is desirable for all the ones we've done so far. But to date, the best we've done is probably mid to high 30s on the Shakespeare project.
And just to correct an error in the report, it refers to the previous resolution of council from December 2020, but it uses the wording of the original resolution prior to council amending it.
Through the chair, we'll have that amended then.
Anything further? Councillor Loden.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Just a clarification on the proposal that was separately circulated to council members around a 40k per hour zone. Is that proposed to be paid by the department?
Through the chair, yes, that will be part of Main Road's contribution. They'll pay for the 40k.
So to be kind of a little bit specific about this, and there's been some conversation back and forth around the difference between a mini roundabout and a standard roundabout. And one of the concern I have is around pedestrians and cyclists. The idea being that it's safer potentially for cyclists because with a mini roundabout, the amount of deflection that you have horizontally is less, so you're less likely to veer out and collect a cyclist in the process. But if we're reducing the amount of horizontal deflection and actually minimizing it, then how will that reduce speeds? Because I thought part of the point of that was that the horizontal deflection is the mechanism by which you achieve that reduced speed.
Well, through the chair, all four legs of the intersection will be give way control. So theoretically, everybody that's approaching the intersection will already be slowing down to observe the give way. So there's already a reduction in speed. And while there's minimum deflection, there is still that requirement. They still have that, for want of a better description, a lump of concrete in the middle of the road that will draw their attention and potentially lead to them going slower.
So currently we would have 2 of those routes into the roundabout with a giveaway sign, and then there'd be a through route for the cyclists. And I guess my lived experience as a cyclist, I'm much more nervous around a roundabout than I am on the roads. If you imagine going down Oxford Street, when you go into that roundabout, that's the point where I'm worried about getting collected by a car versus when I'm on the side and cars are driving down beside me. We're effectively adding in 2 more giveaways, but is there a risk that people just become used to these roundabouts and sort of coast their way through, increasing that risk for cyclists? I know that's not brilliantly worded, but
through the chair, I think that's one of the things we'll find out from this pilot. If we can change driver behaviour and achieve the desired results of less severe accidents, then I think, yeah, that should be a positive.
And if we are to proceed with the trial and after 2 years decide that it's not successful, do we have to then pay to remove all the lumps of concrete out of the road?
Through the chair, yes.
Is that expensive?
Through the chair, it's relatively inexpensive, but there is a cost, yeah.
And the second part of this is around pedestrians. So my understanding is pedestrians are discouraged from crossing at roundabouts because of what's going on in that space. It's a more dangerous space than crossing mid-road or something like that. So are we potentially a logical place for people to cross when they're navigating around the places when they come to these intersections? So are we potentially putting pedestrians at higher risk, and is there anything we can do to create a safer space for these pedestrians?
Through the chair, once again, if we achieve the lower speed, and the survivable speed is often quoted as being 30 k's an hour, and that's what we're hoping to achieve, then the pedestrian has the option of crossing at that point, which is obviously where the ramps are for the footpath network, or going up to mid-block and crossing at that if they feel safer. But if we can bring the speeds down, then I think it's inherently safer for pedestrians, particularly on the ones that have already got no control on them.
Anything further, Councillor Wallace?
Thank you. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. The presenter from Made Roads referred to some updated stats in the 2021 report, but is that available to us? Has that been published?
Through the chair, I shall get a copy of that from Main Roads and certainly incorporate some of the points of that in the amended report.
Yeah, great. Thanks.
Councillor Hallett?
Could we get the whole document as an attachment?
Through the chair, I think it's an Ausroad publication. It may be rather bulky, so I'll determine what the document is, and then certainly if it's viable, we'll circulate it. But I have a speculation it's probably an updated version of one of the Ausroad journals, in which case it's probably unlikely that you'd be able to, for copyright and also the volume.
Councillor Fotakis.
There was mention in one of the questions coming through from Mr. Main on the Ausroad research that the mini roundabouts, his contention were only effective on the approaching of 20 kilometres an hour. So a comment on that, please.
Through the chair, I'm hoping the new March 21 amended will actually update that information, and I'll include that as part of the amended report.
Councillor Fotakis. Yeah, just one further question. So is there an intention that the data that has been collected from the 40 kilometres an hour trial will form part of the baseline data for this pilot project?
Through the chair, yes, the two are associated. So yes, it will give us some indication or guide as to the likely impact.
Anything further? No? Okay. Could we please get an estimate of costs to remove roundabouts, just as this is a potential part of the project cost? In reviewing some implementations of mini roundabouts, less so in Monash, but more internationally, I can see that there is often zebra crossings indicating pedestrian, I guess, priority at all four intersections. Has that been considered in this instance for the design?
Through the chair, yes, it has. We're yet to get Main Roads on board with that one, but they potentially are open to the suggestion.
It would be great if you could ask the direct question between now and next week. I think that would be useful. And then also, I guess, whether that would be part of the fully funded or whether we would need to pay for that component.
Through the chair, if they were to agree to it, it'd be fully funded.
Lovely. Okay. And just a note that there's the element around the 40-kilometre trial, but it just refers to approving that. Is there any intention of consulting with the affected residents on that element of the proposal?
Through the chair, we had two options. We can either get the 40, if on the assumption the mini roundabouts proceed, that the 40 could be put in as part of the project. But Main Roads would be equally happy of leaving it for 6 months to get some data on the effectiveness of the mini roundabouts for the 50k urban speed limit, and we would give us the opportunity to consult with the residents on implementing the 40. So either way, they're comfortable with it. So if that was the preference, we could do that and consult with the residents prior to the 40 being installed.
And through you, Deputy Mayor, just to note, there's another item on the agenda tonight, 5.3, which related to a proposal to move from 50 to 40k throughout the entire city of Vincent, which we've got public comment on as well.
Yes, thank you, CEO. I note that. Yes, I think I'll probably foreshadow an amendment to include some wording in relation to consultation. So we've got that to consider for next week. And so, sorry, just a little bit further clarification on the safe active street or the Vincent Bike Network. There was some reference to like the final route not being determined, and is the intention that the design would be prepared, should the mini roundabout pilot project be approved, that the design would be implemented, including mini roundabouts and other treatments, but the construction component would only commence at the Walcott Street end? Or is the intention that we wouldn't design that area, and that would be whether there was a bike treatment on that section of Norfolk would be dependent on the outcome of the mini roundabout trial and, I guess, impact on cyclists of the mini roundabouts?
Yeah, through the chair, that essentially is we do the detailed design if we were to go north to south on the northern end, and have the prelim concept design for the southern end on the assumption that the mini roundabouts are going in. If they're not, then obviously the design of the safe active street will have to change.
Okay, and I guess I would probably be grateful for just, given that I understand that some of these discussions are fairly live in relation to Main Roads and Department of Transport and the city in relation to Norfolk Street, if we could get just a little bit more detail on the information in relation to the assessment of the suitability from a funding perspective as much as anything else in terms of the implementation of the mini roundabouts on something where we're going to be seeking ongoing funding for or contribution towards safe active street infrastructure. Would that be possible?
Through the chair, I'll have to get my head around that, but yes.
I guess lots of fairly explicit confirmation that if we did this, we're not endangering that, because that kind of was in first and may have priority, if you understand me now. Yeah.
Through the chair, that's basically what the Department of Transport thought too.
Anything further? No. Okay. We will now move on to item 5.3, the accessible city strategy outcomes of advertising. Do I have any questions? Councillor Loden.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Just to cover off some of the questions asked from the gallery, there was a concern that the accessible city strategy does not do anything to address vehicle speeds and also people cutting through or running through the city. So I was hoping to get some comments from administration on that.
Through you, Deputy Mayor. Absolutely. So there is not a specific action in the Accessible City Strategy that addresses rat running. The idea is that the actions implemented in conjunction together would address that by trying to reduce the amount of vehicle traffic and changing the design of streets. So looking at action 2.2.1 for the Lincoln Place guidelines to guide future street improvements, that would assist with that, as well as the parking as well as the surveys.
So just to give something specific as an example, under 2.2.1, what would be a treatment that would happen on a streetscape because of the Lincoln Place model that would then result in lower speeds?
Through you, Deputy Mayor, this could be anything from narrowing the street itself, changing the direction of the traffic that's available, having elements of the street coming out. It could be through things like your mini roundabouts and things like that.
Thank you. There was a query about the Perth parking management area on page 37. And if you could just provide an explanation of how that process works.
Through you, Deputy Mayor, absolutely. I thought that was a really great point that was brought up. Definitely agree that the funds that are currently being used through that could be better utilised. So that action of 2.2.2 addresses this so that we can provide studies and improvements that provide greater benefit than the funds are currently at the moment.
My understanding from past conversations is this is funds that we're obliged to provide for the parking that is in a specified area right close to the city of Perth, and that is currently utilised for primarily the CAT service. Is that correct? So this would then, how do we access that money if we are obliged to provide it to the city of Perth?
Through you, Deputy Mayor, it would be about advocating so that those funds were used differently. So yes, we do have to provide those funds, but correct, at the moment they're majoritarily going towards that CAT service. So an analysis of what we're getting for that will be done, and we would suspect that other transport services such as those transport studies and transport infrastructure improvements will be of more benefit to those within the city of Vincent.
Thank you. I also had a query around the 40-kilometre-hour trial and that that's not proposed to be extended. So we will still be retaining the existing 40-kilometre-an-hour area. Is that correct?
Through you, Deputy Mayor, yes, we will be working with the state government and the inner city group of councils for that in residential areas.
And I've had a specific concern raised with me around the 40K area for Booyah Street, because that's also 40 kilometres an hour. I believe it was originally 60 and then dropped to 40. What's the administration's view on that being 40 kilometres versus 50 kilometres an hour, given it's not a residential street and rated slightly differently to the other areas?
Yeah, through my call. So, sorry, not my call, through the Deputy Mayor. Habit. So the 40K trial is just finished. So I suppose the simple answer is I can't tell you exactly what would happen with Booyah Street because we need to review the data and make a decision about what's going to happen next. So it's hard to give a specific answer. I mean, I get the Booyah Street argument. I've heard it a few times. It does run through the middle and it is a faster road. And is it appropriate? But that'll be definitely part of the review, I think, at the end of the trial.
And so I assume that will come back to council for consideration at some point.
Through you, Chair, I expect it would, yeah.
I also have a couple of specific queries around the process used for undertaking the active transport accessible city strategy. The specific concerns were around lack of referencing and a bibliography attached to this, and whether or not we would consider doing a peer review through a group similar to Peter Newman's group. Was anything like that considered?
Through you, Deputy Mayor, we are in close consultation with that group. So we can definitely share this document. It has also been reviewed by the inner city transport subgroup. So it has been reviewed by many different, I suppose, transport specialists in the area. So I feel like that peer review has been conducted.
And this is very specific and not something I particularly understand myself, but the specific concern was that we've used 2010 Sydney data as a basis for comparison to the City of Vincent in the document. And the feedback I've received is that that's not an appropriate proxy for the City of Vincent. And also that determining the number of trips based on the number of bedrooms is also not an appropriate basis in the academic literature. I recognise this is probably not an easy question to answer, but is there a way we can get some understanding of that possibly?
Through you, Deputy Mayor, we can try and provide that in the notes.
Any further questions? Councillor Fotakis.
Yeah, thank you. Through your Deputy Mayor. It's just back on the issue of the Perth Parking Management Act. Just the question whether if there's going to be any intention from the city to seek an alternative use of those funds, whether there needs to be an advocacy objective within the strategy, seeking a change to the Act. Because my understanding is there isn't a provision for more flexibility with the use of those funds, but I could be incorrect.
Through Deputy Mayor, that action of 2.2 is definitely an advocacy action.
Anything further? No, okay. I just wanted to, at this last stage, foreshadow an amendment to the document for next week, probably around the 3.3.1, 3.3.2, around the city developing a transparent process for the receipt assessment and actioning of resident or ratepayer complaints or concerns around speed, parking and traffic volume. That's it. No other questions. Okay. If there is no other questions on the accessible city strategy, we will now go back to the beginning of the agenda and work our way through. Let's kick off with item 5.1. Number 1/278, Beaufort Street, Perth, unauthorised change of use to restricted premises. Any questions? Councillor Castle.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Just wondering if there's mention in the report about having regard to the vulnerable groups located nearby at Tom Fisher House and assets. Were they specifically asked to comment on this proposal? And if so, did they give a comment?
Yes, through you, Deputy Mayor. They were consulted with during advertising. There was a submission made from Tom Fisher House, and they were objecting to the proposal primarily in relation to the nature of their function and the service that they provide to at-risk groups.
Any further questions? Councillor Hallett.
Through the Deputy Mayor, given the abject failure of state planning regulations to integrate public health policy, what other options are available to the city to prevent development applications for users such as this and cigar bars in the future?
Through Deputy Mayor, ultimately we've got a planning application, so the decision needs to be grounded in planning principles and the planning framework in order to, if that is the outcome that council would be seeking, which is to not enable those types of uses to be contemplated in the first instance, because this subject proposal is a use or permissible use within the commercial zone, then there's a number of ways of dealing with that. Probably the first and foremost approach would be to look at reviewing the scheme in terms of its permissibility, because it is a permissible land use currently. Again, that discussion would not be entirely led by the city. It would need to be discussed with the Department of Planning, and I guess ultimately through some sort of scheme review or amendment to the scheme, that could be reconsidered in terms of permissibility of certain land uses if that's council's wish.
Councillor Toppelberg.
Thank you. Just a couple of questions about site history. I'm not sure if they can be provided. My recollection, well, I went back and had a look. So the land was originally owned by the Department of Housing at the time when the Department of Housing, as I understand it, built those units. My understanding of the shops as they were, and I haven't gone back to the recording, but I can't see any history of it in the item itself as far as the use of the shops. But just to be certain, because it was so WAPC was the approving authority for them to originally be built. They have subsequently, I presume, been separately titled and sold, or either the shops as a whole, or they've been strata titled and sold, and it's now under the city's jurisdiction to make the decision on the land use. Is that correct?
To you, Deputy Mayor, yes, that's generally accurate. There is some brief discussion on page 8 of the agenda in the background section around its original approval by the WAPC. Because the works were being undertaken by the Department of Housing, or the then Department of Housing, that's considered public works. So that was a state government approval that was issued, and subsequent to then, there have been strata and such for those 3 separate tenancies.
Anything further? No, okay, thank you. We will now move on to item 5.2, the draft Pickle District Place Plan. Any questions? Councillor Loden.
Thank you, Mayor. Just noting that the revised Beaufort Street plan includes an action around supporting businesses towards community solar. And so I was just wondering if administration considered including a similarly worded action consistent with what's in the Beaufort Street plan in the Pickle District plan.
Through you, Deputy Mayor, this is something that we can investigate.
And I'll foreshadow an amendment depending on the outcome of that investigation. Thank you.
Any further questions? No, okay, thank you. We've dealt with item 5.3 and 6.1. We'll now move on to item 6.2, advertising of new amended policy, memorial in public places and reserves. Any questions? Councillor Castle.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Just a quick wording question, which I can no longer find in my notes. There is reference in the, yes, in the new policy in clause 1.4, says the city will not permit the burial or interment of ashes. Do they not mean the same thing? And should that perhaps say distribution or scattering?
Through the chair, thank you. We'll take that on the briefing notes and make a modification if necessary.
Any further questions? Okay, just have a question. My understanding is that the review of this policy hasn't followed the city's policy development and review policy process. It's catchy, but important. is because it didn't come to council for a review of objectives prior to being presented for advertising. Can that be confirmed?
Through you, Deputy Mayor, I think this was listed as a draft on the agenda for the February council workshop, but I can confirm that.
So from April 2021, the policy papers were sent out via email as a separate, but was this discussed in February? Has there been that process where that discussion and that receipt of information has occurred at council, or was this one of the items that was shelved because there was a long agenda?
Through you, Deputy Mayor, will confirm, I think it was listed at the February workshop. I can't recall a long discussion about it, and I think we may have requested written feedback or request for information from council members.
Thanks. I'll speak to you next week, but foreshadow deferral. Okay, thank you. Item 6.3, tender number IE 105/2020, design, supply and install solar photovoltaic systems at City of Vincent sites. Councillor Loden.
Thank you, Mayor. I have questions on the confidential section, so I was just hoping that could be raised at the end of the meeting if possible.
Will do. Are there any questions for the public component of the meeting? Okay, we will move on.
Sorry, I do just.
Councillor Topovic.
Through you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I'm very impressed with your pronunciation of Councillor Gontaszewski's surname, by the way. It's been excellent from the chair today. Thank you. I suppose a general principle question. It may be a question of the CEO, but I understand the terms of the lease, but given that some of these leases are pre-existing and some of the benefits to the occupants are significant, whilst there's obviously the long-term benefit to the city in terms of the asset and the electricity generation, can we just get perhaps a broad brush explanation of how the decision-making has occurred around who the beneficiary shall be in terms of where the expenses occurred and where the benefit goes to, and whether anything other than their existing lease terms or their capacity to pay were the considerations of it? Because in some instances, some of the spend is significant and the benefit in the short term, whilst relatively minor, if you look over the length of leases, is significant. So I guess my question is, why is the city spending some of this money when some of the beneficiaries are not the city, if it's not explicitly excluded or included in the lease terms?
Through your chair. So the majority of the projects where the City of Vincent doesn't get the benefit have been removed from the tender. So I sent an email this morning, it is in the report, but just highlighting the fact that there's a big chunk of projects were originally part of the first tender that where we don't get benefit. And that was a big discussion when the item was deferred. And it looks like we won't be doing those projects next year pending those lease discussions. So they've been pushed in the draft capital works program to the year after. So they've been removed from this tender. So they no longer form part. So if you look at the second page in the report, those are the projects that are still remain within the tender. So I think Mount Hawthorne Community Centre, we get the benefit, the city does. There is a small benefit to us with Britannia Reserve, but you can see that that is a lease renewal in March 2022. The same as Bethany, Vincent Community Centre, where we don't get the benefit, but there's a lease renewal coming up. So there are some notes in the report about that being part of the negotiation of the lease renewal. So the majority of the ones where the City of Vincent doesn't get the benefit have been removed from the tender.
Just further to that, so that table, and that's what I was referring to on page 253, would it be better that the who saves the dollars column perhaps read to be confirmed? Or is that just noting that in the original tender, that's what was proposed? If the intent is for that to potentially be negotiated, would it not be more accurate that the current city's position is that should be to be confirmed through that column?
Yeah, through your chair. So you're right, that table on page 253 of those projects have now been removed from the tender pending those discussions, if that makes sense, because that was part of the reason for the deferral, that the city didn't have a mechanism to get to share that benefit. So that's an ongoing discussion. So they've been removed from the tender until those matters are resolved.
So if somebody was reading this report and they were to have a look at, for example, Belgravia Leisure and look at the spend of $78,000, but in the column where it says that the beneficiary or the who saves the dollars would be Belgravia Leisure, the paragraph that precedes the table, which says council's outstanding questions, including mechanisms for recouping of solar costs, will be, that's supposed to give a surety to someone who may be concerned that a commercial operator would potentially have a significant benefit of reduced electricity costs at the expense of Vincent ratepayers. Is that, so those two read in conjunction means exactly that? Is that correct?
Through you, Chair. Yes, it does, I think. But another way to write the report on reflection, and we can do this between briefing and council, is just to remove this table and those sections because it's background. It's no longer part of the tender. So to clean things up, we could be very precise about which projects in the tender and not mention the ones that have now been removed, if that helps, council.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think, so I do have a question that can be discussed in public. I think I've previously asked some questions through the workshop process in relation to the sustainable environment strategy and the where the city's at in terms of meeting its targets and whether the actions in the sustainable environment strategy will be met if the city or if the city doesn't undertake, I guess, the full component that was originally proposed. But I guess I would be interested in knowing in relation to the actions and targets in the SES as to the contribution of the proposed, whether the city will meet its targets with over the 2 years in relation, if we just include these particular sites. So that's one question. And if you, okay.
Can I take that on notice?
Yes,
No?
I was going to say, definitely take that on notice. And then the other one is, sorry, just the Vincent Community Centre bracket Bethany. Is this Vincent Street? Well, or is this sounding very vague? But my understanding that Bethany was the operators of the day centre near Royal Park Hall. And that has never been known previous, like that's their day centre. Is that correct?
Yeah, so if I can answer, Chair.
So is this,
Yeah.
this talks about the Vincent Community Centre
does,
bracket Bethany. My understanding was the Vincent Community Centre was right next to the library and Bethany was a private operation on road. Could we just get clarification on what site it is proposed to actually put the solar panels on? Thank you.
Yeah. Yes, Chair, we'll clarify that.
Okay. All right. Let's move on to item 6.4, e-permits implementation progress report. Do I have any questions on this item? No. Okay, let's move on to item 7.1 under community and business services, authorisation of expenditure for the period 1 March to 31 March 2021. Any questions? Councillor Hallett.
Through you, Chair, just to follow up to a similar question at a previous briefing, have we ensured that local printers have been approached as preferred options before going to companies outside of Vincent? On notice is fine.
Through you, Chair, that is my understanding. I'll confirm that that still remains.
Councillor Toppelberg.
Thank you. Just something that's it's been flagged or identified through the way in which the reports are written, but is it possible in future to separate design advisory meeting fees and design advisory fees? So where individuals so design advisory consultancy separate from design advisory fees, just so we can see where meetings have been attended or where individuals are consulted for their expertise. That's able to
Through
be
you,
separated.
Chair, we can make that change in future months. Yep.
Councillor Tarkas.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Through you to the Director, just a couple of costings on that. Can the charge that's come through, and I know these are entered manually, on the 19th of March from the City of Stirling, they do have the waste tipping fees and the Meals on Wheels component brought in together. Can we have those separated in future, please, because they're two very different services? On the distribution of the flyers, can we get an indication on those amounts as to the number of flyers that were distributed for that? And on temporary staff, just going through our temporary staff costs over the months, previous sort of 6 or 7 months, we haven't tipped over that $100,000 mark. So just want to get an explanation. We're now up, this one's almost about, from my calculation, 134,000. So just want to get some understanding whether it's specific projects, but while we've really got the peak at this point on that one.
Yeah,
and on notice is fine.
Yeah, thank you. I'll take those on notice.
Any further questions? Okay, we will move on to item 7.2, investment report as at 31 March 2021. Any questions? No, okay. Item 7.3, financial statements as at 31 March 2021. Any questions? I'm going to use my power as presiding officer to swap the order of the next two items just to deal with 2021 prior to dealing with 21-22. So we'll just move to item 7.5, the May budget review. Does anyone have any questions? Okay, well, I obviously do. So I only have one. So this just relates, I'm just going to move to it because I don't think it's in this. No, I've got to open up a different document. Bear with me. It just relates to the savings that were identified through this process. I think it was that were planning to be moved to the Asset Sustainability Reserve. I believe it was, I'm still getting there, but I think it was about 1.3 million. Thank you for the list. That was really useful to look at the list of the projects and the carry forwards. Where the items have had a revised budget that has been identified as a saving, do we have, or is it possible to get just a list of which of those items are, I guess, true savings in terms of perhaps we've done the work and it cost less versus we haven't done the work yet, or we're deferring it perhaps for the period that is likely to be within the CBP. That would be useful, I think, to get an understanding, I guess, of the position. And then I guess also with that in mind, was there any thinking in relation to the distribution of funds in terms of moving the funds into the Asset Sustainability Reserve and leaving 135 as a surplus? Is there any particular thinking in relation to that distribution?
Yeah, so the figures that we have that show the surplus of 135, it, as best we know, reflects the current position and it reflects the state of those projects, including any provision for carry forwards or deferments or savings. So I'm not sure if that answers that latter question, but I can certainly go through and provide a little bit more of a breakdown in terms of those carry forward figures. Are they a true saving or is it something that's being deferred or postponed? And all of those decisions then are wrapped up in that final figure. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. That would be very useful. All right. We will now move back to, and I'll just go back to my agenda. So bear with me. Item 7.4, differential rating strategy 21-22. Questions? Councillor Loden.
Thank you. Just in referring to an earlier email I've sent through to administration, I'd like to request an amendment to include a 65 kilowatt solar array at Beatty Park, which is proposed to occur as a loan to the city. And I'm happy to take advice from administration on how best to word that. The proposal refers specifically to the idea of a shade structure in the car park, but it doesn't necessarily have to be that. I think there could be potentially be alternative locations around Beatty Park that might be preferable, but as a starting point, that's probably a good basis.
Any comments?
No, through you, Chair, I'm aware of that request and I'm happy to assist with the amendment.
Thank you. Any further questions? Okay. I will just foreshadow an amendment that will be put forward from Mayor Cole in the coming weeks to amend the rate setting strategy to reflect a 2.4% increase in the residential rate in the dollar with the associated and flow on changes into the recommendation and papers.
Yeah, through your Chair, the Mayor's mentioned that to me as well. That has an impact of about $135,000 difference, and we'll we'll prepare some figures on that for Council.
Thank you. Councillor Fotakis.
That was my question, part answered there, just to get an idea on that closing deficit. So I think from my calculations puts it at about 1.63 or 642.
Yeah, through your Chair, I'll confirm that for you.
Councillor Toppelberg.
Can we just get some commentary, because there's been some interest in the vacant properties. I understand the basis no more than the vacant residential, the no more than 50% can be on the vacant rate. But given that the rate in the dollar, because of the valuation or the revaluation year last year, because of the GRV revaluation, can we perhaps get some layman's terms explanation of how the city is using its differential rating, particularly with vacant properties? Commercial seems to make more sense the way that it reads currently, but given the disparity between vacant commercial and other commercial in the rate in the dollar, what are the medium-term strategies to be able to ensure that there is because the reason for it being differential on vacant is to incentivise development on those properties, as I understand it, but the numbers don't reflect it as presented here. Can that can both the logic, the requirements of the Act and the strategies to address that over time? Can we get some commentary on that, please?
Yeah, through you, Chair, I'll spend a bit of time crafting a response to that question, and I'll include that in the notes and also in the paper.
Because I might ask you again next week.
Yes,
thanks.
correct.
Councillor Loden.
Thank you. Just in terms of the proposed amendment, if we could include details around impacts on the long-term financial plan for that amendment as well, would be great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any further questions on the differential rating strategy? No. Okay. Going back. Just go back to my main agenda. Okay, so next item is, oh yeah, no, I'm just going to wait till I navigate back to my document with the contents. Thanks. Great. Is 8.1, the quarterly update of 26 strategic projects outlined in the corporate business plan 2021 to 23-24. Councillor Fotakis.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Just through you to the CEO, just want to get some confirmation, a couple of dates that were actually put in the report. Says that the community engagement framework is currently out for advertising. Is that taking into account that it starts next week? So the report's talking about next week's decision, and similarly with Robinson Park, when we foresee that's going out, and the asset management and sustainability strategy, it says that it's closed, but as far as I'm aware, that's open until the 17th of May.
Through you, Deputy Mayor, that's correct. We've got a council decision to conduct public consultation on the community consultation framework and Robinson Park. They'll be going live momentarily. The media releases have been prepared for Mayor Cole to sign off, so they'll be loaded up onto our website in the next
tomorrow, I've just been told. So yes, by the time that this report's ready for OMC, that report will be correct in terms of those dates. And yes, the asset sustainability strategy is still currently open for comment, and there are councillors and the mayor have been involved in pop-up consultation on that over the last few days.
Thank you. Yeah, so can we get the report just to reflect those correct sort of like dates, please? Banks Reserve Master Plan, we've met with local residents on that. I'm not too sure whether the update needs to include reference to the demolition of the building currently being on hold. Project 2 on the FOGO, if you can advise when public advertising is going to start to commence on that project as well, too, please.
Through you, Chair, there has been some public advertising that has commenced, but the main graphical-based advertising will be prepared by the end of this month.
Any further questions? Can I just confirm, just get confirmation that since the project plans were last baselined for each of these 26 projects, there's been no change to scope, timelines, costs or risks of any of the projects?
Through you, Deputy Mayor, some of the risks may have changed during the time, which we wouldn't have been aware of, but we haven't brought those updates to note any of those changes back to Council, which we would normally do as part of an annual process following adoption of the corporate business plan, which is part of the new process we're trying to put in place.
So the only thing out of scope, timelines, costs or risks that are potentially likely to have changed is that there may have been some changes to project risks on the individual project risk registers, but none of the projects as noted in the report are considered to be have any significant risks associated with them and are not considered to be a significant risk in themselves.
Through you, Deputy Mayor, we've got some clarification on what the health tracker would be in terms of significant change or a meaningful change that would require council approval in terms of a change in budget that would require something over and above that's already been budgeted or approved. And if there was a significant change like 5 or 10 or 20%, we would need to bring that back to council for approval. Sometimes the project plans have estimates before we go out for tender for particular pieces of work, and the actuals will vary. But if there was a significant cost overrun, then that would be something that would bring back to council for visibility on the major projects. We also provide updates via the audit committee on the corporate risk register. Some of those do have project risks, but not on most of the current ones that are listed on this project status report.
Thank you. And sorry, just a margin. Just a question in relation to Beatty Park 2062. I believe there was a council decision requiring a options paper for April. And can I get an update on that, please?
Yes, to you, Deputy Mayor. That has been delayed by several weeks. We've been working this through the project steering committee. The next stage was to get some advice from a heritage architect on what the options could be for potential work around the main foyer entrance, which may or may not involve budget issues for our next financial year, and that work we've currently put out that request for work for quotations, which we'll be receiving back this Friday, but that has been delayed by a month in terms of getting that options paper back to council.
Do you have so is this options paper to be presented to the June OMC, or what's the estimate there?
Through you, Chair, I think I'm just trying to find the timelines that are in the brief to the Heritage Architect, but we'll be getting quotes through from them this week. I think we have provided them with 3 to 4 weeks to provide us with a written paper. The next step after that would be that we would have a meeting with the steering committee, and subject to their support, it would then come to the following council meeting after that meeting. So I think we're talking probably June or July cycles, depending on how speedily we work through that process.
Thank you. And just a question on the corporate business plan. We didn't discuss that at our previous budget workshop. What is the estimated time frame for the annual review of the corporate business plan to be completed and for a new CBP to be adopted?
Yeah, through you, Chair, the corporate business plan is being prepared in conjunction with the annual budget and the LTFP. The managerial teams are currently updating those documents, and we would be expecting it's coming to, I believe it's the next budget workshop, you'll see a draft, and then it will be the following budget workshop, you'll see a final draft with the idea that it goes to the June OCM for approval along with the annual budget.
Thank you. Just also get some comment in relation to the update around the status update on the current works at Beatty Park and the indoor pool concourse renewal and whether there's the tiles and have been delivered and are due to be implemented, or what the timeframe is for that.
Yeah, through your Chair. So there's 2 different projects. So the first is the indoor pool. That's the project that's been approved by council. That is on track. We've had a few delays with the slides that have been ordered because they were being built in Malaysia and they were impacted by a COVID shutdown, but we think that's a matter of weeks rather than an extensive delay. There's also a secondary project which we have received funding from the federal government to look at the tiling around the indoor pool on the concourse. And that is coming back to council as a project amendment. The recommendation that has been put forward by the officers, which I'm just finalising that documentation now, is that we will be able to fund replacing the tiles rather than sealing them, which we believe is going to provide us with a better quality outcome. When we went through the quotation process, it actually came in a lot cheaper than was expected, and we were able to fully fund it with the federal government grant that we've received, the LRCI grant. So I'll bring that through as a project amendment.
Thank you. And if we can just, within that, we can get commentary on closure times and impact to any projected budget. I know that our budget did consider a fairly extended closure for the current works. Any further questions, Councillor Fotakis?
Just a couple of questions that have come through from Mayor Cole. One with regards to the 40km/h trial, through you, Deputy Mayor, as to when we can expect, now that it's been completed, when publication of the results can be expected.
Yeah, through your Chair, so I'll take that on notice and I'll just check the exact dates and put that in the notes.
Through you, Deputy Mayor, I think we did publish the 12-month results on the website when we released the Accessible City Strategy And because we were consulting the community about establishing 50 to 40 across the entire city of Vincent, we were waiting for council consideration of that strategy to form a view on whether or not the trial area should continue.
Thank you, CEO. Just a second question from Nicole was with regards to the draft asset sustainability management strategy. Just when will the community panel be meeting? Her understanding was it wasn't happening until June, July, and should that actually then cause the consultation period to be further extended, currently set to close on the 17th of May?
Yeah, through you, Chair. So the consultation, as we know, has been extended to the 17th of May. The community panel is planned to occur in mid-June. The officers are suggesting we stick to those timeframes because in the interim period between consultation closing, we'll use that feedback from consultation to actually prepare and craft the workshops that we're going to have with the community panel, so that we can actually feed that community feedback into the community panels and use their feedback to help us sort of finesse it to the next step. So there is intentionally a period of time between the close of one process and the beginning of the next one.
So out of interest, how is the consultation going? Are we getting sufficient data coming back and interest in terms of the consultation?
Yeah, through you, Chair, I can get a status update on how that's occurring. I know that we've been having some excellent pop-up consultations at various sites around the city, and I'll get a little bit more detail on that in the briefing notes.
Anything further? No. Okay, we'll move on to item 8.2, new lease to the Western Australian Volleyball Association Incorporated portion of 413 Bulwer Street, West Perth. Councillor Toppelberg.
Thank you. A couple of questions. Is there a reason why we haven't received a business case to just lease out the car parking bays, considering we're talking about 10 car parking bays for exclusive use and 5 which would be timed at 3 hours, but my understanding of the minimum monthly rental on car bays was that it would be financially favourable to the city over and above what's proposed here, just to lease the car parking bays and leave the building vacant. So if the intent is to not charge for the car parking bays, are we sure that's in the best financial interest of the city? That's my first question.
Through Deputy Mayor, we haven't considered that, no. We didn't get a valuation of those car bays either, so yeah, it's a little hard to tell what they are worth to the city, and yeah, as you say, whether it would be better off just having the office as vacant. We can consider that. In this case, the real intent of this item was to essentially extend that lease for Volleyball WA. I think obviously they had some issues going through COVID, and generally they were paying quite a low rate compared to our valuation that we had. So really in the interest of I suppose the demand in the community to keep that facility there, we didn't seek any real innovative or alternatives for the site. There would probably be a little bit of interest for other commercial uses of the office as well, if that was something that council wanted to pursue. But in this case, administration's recommendation is that we stay with Volleyball WA for now, at least since we have managed to negotiate a slightly higher rent to $15,000, and yeah, they are willing to stay on. So
I accept. So you made. We'll talk to it next week, but you mentioned about the community interest. My guess is that the community interest in maintaining the facility there relates to the presence of the courts, not to the offices. Would that be a fair assessment? What you meant by community interest in retaining volleyball's location there?
Through the chair, yes, that is accurate.
Thank you. And I guess if it's possible to get some data, whether it be through the consultant that was used for the valuation or otherwise, but given that it's intended to include within the lease the exclusive use, and the 5 visitor bays is potentially separate given the
that they would be time limited, but given the exclusive use in business hours effectively of the car parking and its proximity to the high frequency bus route on Charles Street, it would be good to get some idea commercially of what that may be worth, even if it's just to be listed as something that was given as in kind along with the lease. I think that would be valuable data. If that's possible. And the in the conclusion of the report, sorry, I'll just go to it. Sorry, that it makes, whilst the valuation that we received is confidential, there is a discussion in the report of the valuation. So the specific value, so the valuation is presented, and effectively the recommendation looks at only charging a proportion of the offices, but it doesn't explain, it refers to the conditions of it, and obviously the fact that there would be limited other uses if there was no expenditure from any other prospective occupant or the city. But given the land size, its location or otherwise, has there been, and I'm also conscious that it's a 2+2 that's recommended, it's not a 10+10, which we're coming out of, so I'm cognizant of that. But has there been any consideration of any other potential use for the land, and particularly the financial benefit potentially to the city, given its location, the existence of car parking, etc.?
Through the chair, yeah, I think that kind of consideration is more of a broader discussion that we've been having around a number of our land holdings. And so in this case, that is one of the reasons why we're only proposing a 2+2 to leave that option open in future. It's obviously quite a large site and has some potential. In this instance, yeah, we thought that this was probably the real only reasonable and best use for the site, given there are the courts there and the change rooms, which no other service or commercial operator would really want to use except for Volleyball WA.
Okay, and if we can perhaps get some data as to, I presume that there was significant expenditure by Volleyball WA to create particularly the outside courts. We can get some information as to what their level of expenditure was and when that occurred. And if we do have any local usage data available, so how many Vincent residents are actually making use of the facility, if that's possible. If it's not possible in the next week, I'm happy to receive it at a later date, but just to get an idea of how valuable it actually is to the city of Vincent beyond just the leasing of it to Volleyball WA, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Yes, no worries.
Any questions? Councillor Vatakis.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Through you, just with regards to the possible replacement of the garage, now the report does refer to quite a significant crack there. It's still usable. And the table that's on attachment 3 on page 371 and plus does actually cite that it's to the city's discretion whether that replace or not. So are you satisfied that there isn't any sort of like undue impact on the tenant should we decide not to replace that garage in the event that it's not accessible?
Through the chair, sorry, do you mind just clarifying what you mean by undue impact on the tenant?
Yeah, so if the tenant actually says that not having access to that garage, although it's only 2.3% of the total let area, and my calculations are that it also comprises about 2.3% of the rent, has any risk to the city actually being finding that the lease can actually either be terminated or additional costs sought from the city to supply their own, those sort of things.
Thank you. Through the chair, I'll answer that in the briefing notes. If you don't mind, I do note that the licence area plan shows that shed as included in the licence area. So it's definitely part of this lease. I'll provide some more information on what that could mean and potentially an extra condition.
Anything further? Okay, I just have a question in relation to, I've got the table on it's attachment 3 that goes through the obligations, just and of the lessor and lessee. Are these obligations the standard obligations if this lease was being issued in accordance with the approved property management framework, or are there any deviations to those obligations?
Through the chair, sorry, I'm not sure if they're in line exactly with the property management framework, but they would be specific to this actual lease and enforced through the conditions that are approved.
Does Volleyball WA want a longer lease?
Through the chair, I'm not sure about that. I can find out for the briefing notes.
Thank you. The courts with the licence, when Volleyball WA used that, I think this is probably further to Councillor Toppelberg's questions. Do we have sort of that health check information as we would have for some of our other clubs?
I can provide that by the briefing notes.
Thank you. That would be very useful. And I guess I will foreshadow an amendment to bring this item in line with the property management framework lease in terms of the time and obligations on the city, in terms of the maintenance for the timing, and I guess also perhaps subject to what the response is to some of Councillor Toppelberg's questions in relation to parking. But yeah,
sorry, could I just check? Was there a specific part of that maintenance schedule that you thought was inconsistent?
No, I think just more in relation to the further to Councillor Fotakis's question in relation to the garage forming part of the licence area, not the lease area, and whether that is, I guess I'd be quite interested. So sorry, just to clarify, the garage is a part of the licence, not the lease. I think you said licence before, but it's...
I may have said licence.
But it's lease, isn't it?
Lease.
Yeah, okay, that makes much more sense.
But
Yes.
sorry, it's called... I did say licensed area, but I believe it is under the lease, yes.
Yes, I know that, yeah, okay. And, but I guess probably my question relates to the maintenance of that structure as to if my understanding from the report is that what's been presented to us is something of an interim position while this facilities management review or facilities plan is complete. And I guess I want to see something that is, if we weren't doing that, but we were assessing this according to our property management framework, what the lease that would come forward would look like and what the obligations and costs associated with signing up to a lease such as that, just for consideration, that would be very useful.
Great, yep.
Thank you. Councillor Toppelberg.
Sorry, just further to the question that was asked through the acting manager of governance. Is that correct? There you go, Jordan. That'll do. Just to be so the request, I think, also given that the item deals with the proposal to lease a property, we should, given that we have the property management framework from a governance perspective, it should be presented, even if it does tick all of those boxes. I think it would be good governance practice to receive that information so that Councillor Kontrashevsky doesn't have to ask the question. It's probably, I think, as a self-check to make sure that we are ticking those boxes, if that's possible, please.
Definitely, yeah, we can put that into the report template.
Thank you. Any further questions on this item? No. All right. We will now move on to 8.4, report and minutes from the Audit Committee meeting held on 4 May 2021. Any questions on this item? No. We will now move on to 8.5, the information bulletin. Councillor Hallett.
Just to flag when we go into confidential for the item that Councillor Loden requested, I'd just like to ask a question about one of the SAP issues.
Thank you, will do. Any further questions? Councillor Loden.
Just on the development application side of things, I was curious, I've noticed that we're seeing some applications taking over 200 days to process just in the last few months. I was just curious as to the cause. Is that because we're waiting on feedback from the applicants, or is there issues just because of the large backlog that we have at the moment?
Yes, through you, Deputy Mayor. There's a couple of issues, as was set out in the briefing notes last month, really the same issues. So builders are struggling to respond to requests for further information because they're quite busy at the moment and there's a lot of competing demands that they have. So they're often leaving their DAs to sit while they progress other work that they consider as a higher priority. And the city's had a number of vacancies in the planning team, which we're working to fill, and hopefully we'll have them all filled in the next few months.
And I recognise we're going through a period of large amount of development applications coming through, and that's probably going to continue for some period of time. Once those vacancies are filled, do we feel like we have sufficient resources there, or do we need to potentially consider some additional resources to get us over the hump, so to speak?
Yes, through the Deputy Mayor, I'll just clarify. So when the pandemic hit and the state of emergency hit, we made a deliberate decision to leave a number of positions vacant and to convert those into temporary positions because we wanted to create some flexibility. We assumed at that time that the number of development applications would drop for obvious reasons. That didn't happen. And so we then moved to fill those vacancies on a temporary basis. Now, we've had some success with that. We've been able to fill some of those roles with some great staff. In other circumstances, those staff have only had temporary roles, and so they've moved on to permanent roles. So we're now looking to try and convert some of those temporary roles to permanent roles so that we can attract longer term staff and better quality staff, and we don't miss the opportunities that's created by training up a staff member only for them to leave. So yes, we have a plan in place to address this issue longer term. We're doing that, and it will just take some months now for us to get to a point where we have a full team, we have the right number of permanent staff, given the economic situation and the number of applications we're receiving.
Anything further? No. Okay. We have no motions of which notice has been given, and we have no items under representation on committees and public bodies. We will now move to stop the live stream so that we can discuss the confidential attachments in relation to our solar tender and some